means a lot. First of all, I want to greet everybody here, but also those who are joining us live stream. It's always great. Let's wave and greet them. Don't be shy. If you got questions, just speak out. And I can't see you because I'm not looking at the screen, but somebody here will pick you up. And so I think that works usually pretty well. Sunday forum for this week. I just want to encourage you to watch it. It's something that we all know a little about, but we don't know the whole story. And that's about following the casserole from church to what we do is follow to Ron Solomon's kitchen, where he makes casseroles. And then he brings them to church. And a lot of people don't know we have a deep freeze in the kitchen that is dedicated only to casserole. Because I think about 30 fit inside of the deep freeze. And once the deep freeze is filled with 30 casseroles,
Oh, hi, Jenny.
Let Jenny sit down. I'll grab it.
Come on over here.
I know Jenny's here.
It's come learn Jenny too.
Well, there's two here.
when you come late, Margaret, you got to sit in the front pew, or somebody's got to do it.
I gotta bring my poor kids.
They go in the peanut gallery.
Yeah,
Oh, no, the pastor used to have to step up.
yeah, that's the old technique.
Well, that's what he says. If you don't remember about you, is that I have to sleep over your kids. At least they were there.
Exactly.
Oh, he wasn't complaining.
No. So we're talking about casseroles. So we follow them this week, so we know kind of the path that they take. And so we went every step of the way from
Well, they put
when you
air tags on
receive
it?
the casseroles to Ron Solomon's kitchen, to our kitchen, where we put 30 of them in the deep freeze. When the deep freeze is filled, Carolyn Faust comes by. She's been doing this for decades, literally decades. She takes them over to Justin's place. So Justin's place is a feeding program. It's also the first step in a drug rehab program. So that you stay there for about a month and they observe you to see if they can send you to their long-term facility. But they're on top of that work. They also feed 60 to 120 people, 60 about a time, 60 to 80, and then 120 a day. And so we brought the casseroles over there, and then we interviewed some of their staff and then watched the feeding. So you could see the casserole going from beginning to end. And it was
If they like them.
they love them. Of course. Now, Ron gives a really good Ron started this years ago with his wife, who's since has died. And so both as a nice memory for her that he keeps making the casseroles. He makes about 4 a month. But he said, and also because he said it's one of the reasons he comes to Emmanuel is feeding. He said, he says, not the sermons. No, he said it's because we feed. That to me is the most important thing that you can do. So he said he keeps one a month. And if he doesn't like it, then he doesn't give the other ones to Justin's place. He said, if I don't like it, I only give to Justin's place the casseroles that I like, which is kind of nice. And so he makes mac and cheese and he makes some sort of barbecue rib.
So he doesn't just follow the directions.
No, he does a lot, as do a lot of people. Some, start with the menu and then they just do their own thing.
Sure.
So I was really kind of happy with it and I learned a lot. I had not spent a lot of time at Justin's place. And we got to spend time there and they got to explain the whole drill, which was great. Initially, I thought, and I was correct, that they wouldn't let me film the feeding.
Yeah.
Because they don't let you show faces, and that's a good policy, of
Yeah.
course. But then they filmed it for us. And they did show some faces, but they did it.
Yeah.
And they wanted to do it because we have a very good relationship with St. Matthew's House. So when they heard we were there, they said, if you come back next week, we'll film it for you because we want to encourage you. If we produce about 50 casseroles a month. That's kind of what we try to do. And so that's a big deal. That feeds a lot of people. Anyway, so I encourage you to watch that. I think it's something we know, something we've been doing for a long time, but it's something that we don't always see the whole process, especially we don't see the gratitude for all the people who come to Justin's place. Many people will camp down there. That's on Airport Road. So they don't have to travel a long way to get their food every day. So you can come there for breakfast and lunch, and then they do dinners, I think, once a month at the United Methodist Church. It's right next door. And the United Methodist Church then opens up their facility so they have one meal in air conditioned conditions. That's kind of the idea. So it's really, again, really impressive. And does anyone here, won't put you on the spot, does anybody have done those casseroles? Is that something?
Made them.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, good.
I have been at the other end of it when they have brought them to the children to eat. Yeah,
Oh,
because I used to tutor there.
at St. Matthew's house or Justin's place?
No, St. Matthew's.
St. Matthew's house. Right.
And they'd come, sometimes because the mother had to work late or something, they would get, home. But that's their home now, and they would get late. So then they still needed something to eat. So they were still able to feed them. They would go there and they'd eat, and the food stacked up and could still eat.
I don't know, I used to know, but I don't know how many women are there with children, but they've got about a special section for the women and children with a nice playground. I mean, St. Matthew's house just does so many things well. It's just, Lulu's Kitchen, you go there, that's impressive. I don't know if you've ever had lunch there. I had,
the summer sisters go there for lunch. That's my next project.
yeah, it's delightful, it's just a wonderful place to have lunch. And of course, it's a training ground for those going through the program. I didn't realize that one of the car shows here in Naples is sponsored by St. Matthew's. So
Yeah.
that's a
Yeah.
Yes.
yeah, I didn't, it's amazing what they can pull off. They have thrift stores, thrift shops all over. One of the things that I'd asked them, they have people all over the country, of course, coming here to say, how do you do it? Because everybody wants something like St. Matthew's house in their community. And one of the things they told me, and it was kind of interesting, is one of the reasons they could pull off what they do and raise so much money is because of the thrift stores. But that's because when people die or move out of Naples, they leave good furniture, not just junk. And then they can resell it at a pretty good price and make money. But not everybody can replicate that in other places around the country. So
My table came from St. Matthew's and I have a china cupboard from St. Matthew's.
that's right. So good. Anything else? Can't think of anything else you wanna happy hour on Monday again. Please join us. Several here do. We're an episode, I can't remember, 5, season 2 of The Chosen. We're following that. Some people here have cheated and gone ahead and watched the whole binge, watched all 4 seasons. We won't mention any names, Melissa. You and what?
It's hard not to.
Oh.
No.
I discipline myself because I get confused what's in which episode, and then it's hard to restrict the conversation, but it's just so tremendous. So whether you join us or not for the conversation, watching The Chosen, I think is really I think about it inspiring. All right, First Peter. As Jan said, she likes the short books. You can actually read them, it's not like we're reading Isaiah, or Jeremiah. Interesting, notice right off the bat, the introduction. Again, this is a letter, formal. You've got introduction, a body, and a conclusion, just like you would write a letter. Dear so-and-so, how are you doing? I'm doing fine.
Yeah.
Then you go to whatever you want to talk about, right? But there's a nice greeting, and then how do you end your letters? We have a kind of short form, sincerely, or if it's a family member, you might say, thinking about you all the time, whatever it might be, right? So you've got that here. look at how Peter, and we're talking about Peter, the apostle Peter. Look how he addresses his audience. To God's elect,
Mhm.
strangers in the world.
Exiles.
Wow. Scattered throughout Pontus, Galatia, Cappadocia. We're talking about Turkey,
Mhm.
right? These towns, Asia, Bithynia, who have been chosen according to the foreknowledge of God the Father through the sanctifying work of the Spirit for obedience to Jesus Christ and sprinkled by his blood. What do you pick up there?
The believers, they're exiled. Yeah, exiles is used in my translation as well.
It's a pretty strong word. Why exiled? Who are these people?
They're the ones that left Rome because it burned down and
Possibly.
they're being persecuted.
Mhm. Or throughout the whole world and have been moved around.
Mhm.
So these are migrants,
Mhm.
for all sorts of different reasons. They're moving around the empire. But the key is they're not home. They're not living in their hometown. They're not living with their families, right? There are other places. And I don't know if we can make comparisons. But when you don't live at home, life is tougher. Right. For some of you, you grow up in a town and you know everybody, you went to school, with all your friends. If you need something, you know where to go, you know to whom to turn, right? You might have family, you might have friends. It's a more secure environment.
Supportive.
Then you take a job somewhere else and you don't know anybody. Wow, it just, we're not talking about persecution here, we're just talking about it's hard to navigate life when you don't have a personal infrastructure, being networks, friends and family. Now add on top of that, so that's what the situation we have here, and he's writing to Gentiles. That's going to be important because you wouldn't guess it with this introduction. He's talking to Gentiles who've been scattered all over the Roman Empire, just happen to be in churches, right? So they're not with their own people, they're not with their own family, they're not with their own, what's that?
Their own kind.
They're not with their own kind. Yeah. So it'd be like going to almost any US city, right? Where there are people speaking all sorts of different languages or from all sorts of different places, right? They never would have guessed 10 years ago that they'd be living now in Naples, but here they are. Maybe they're from Colombia or Puerto Rico or from wherever. They're not home. Language is different, very possibly. Many were slaves. And they're now being persecuted because of their faith. Top of all that, right? You're getting persecuted. So this is tough. What is Peter doing writing to Gentiles? Remember, all the apostles pretty much stayed home, not all, to work with their fellow Jewish converts, right? To work in synagogues. That's where they felt most comfortable. Paul is the apostle to the Gentiles, but here we see Peter also being an apostle to the Gentiles.
Was he chosen by God to do it?
That's what it seems, he feels that way, right? He's gone to Rome, he didn't stay home in Jerusalem.
Jesus said, upon this rock I will build my church, so he's spreading little pebbles everywhere.
We don't think about this as much as Protestants, but boy, if you're Roman Catholic, you think a lot about Peter and Rome, right? I mean, for obvious reasons.
He's being persecuted, but he's encouraging these exiles who are being persecuted. He's trying to encourage them, saying, stay the course, trust in the Lord, the end is coming, we'll be glorified,
Which is interesting because, he's talking not to those churches in Italy. I'm using antiquated language here. He's not the local church in Rome he's writing to. He's writing to Gentiles. He's sensitive to what's going on in Turkey with Gentiles. So it's really interesting. Or, you know, if he had written back to the church in Jerusalem, you go, oh, that makes sense. He's writing back to the people he knows. Or if he wrote to, like Paul does initially, to any of the Christians who were converted in synagogues, either in Greece or in Turkey, that would make sense. Here, it's a real sensitivity to what's going on in Asia Minor. And it's a circular letter. So this was meant to be passed around to various audiences.
I
But-
think if you look at, if you watch The Chosen and you see his kind of evolution from, well, Lord, how come we're going to the Gentiles? I mean, he's trying to figure it out, right? And then Jesus says, well, you are the rock. It's like, I think he's sometimes in a quandary, like, okay, how do I do this? How do I get it right?
It says Peter is always in a quandary.
Yes.
So that's the nice thing about Peter. He's bold, he's always in a quandary, which gets him in trouble sometimes, but then
He's also brave, or, you know,
he is brave and bold, you
Yeah.
know, so there's, Jesus sees something in his leadership, obviously, which is, you see that in The Chosen too. I think it's just Jesus and his wife Eden who
yeah.
see his greatness.
It's from Patriots dog, right?
He uses this language, and I'm pointing it out. First of all, he says, "Grace and peace be yours in abundance." That's just a lovely, it's a lovely line. But for obedience to Jesus Christ and sprinkling by his blood. I find that a strange formulation in the introduction of a letter. And it's a very Jewish idea. Yeah, he's pointing to the sacrifice. If you're a Gentile, then you would also know sacrifice language because you would have seen pagan rituals in your hometown, and maybe you would have participated in them. But I'm not sure they would use that sprinkling language. And so here is going to set the tone for the whole book. That Peter is going to use Old Testament imagery scattered through the Torah, through the prophets, but especially through the first 5 books, to say this story applies to you Gentiles. It's quite a unique book that way, and that all the Jewish references are going to be used to be applied to the Gentiles. Paul doesn't do this. Paul uses other language to identify with Gentiles, language from their philosophers that they would know, right? So Mars Hill, we remember that in Acts. That's not where Peter goes. He's marinated in the Old Testament imagery and language, and he's going to say, and you've now been included in all this. They'll use temple language and exile language and Exodus language and sacrifice language, pulling all those images and saying, now this all applies to you. Aliens, Gentiles in a foreign place. So that's, I think, quite unique in this book. And so we'll want to watch that language because I think it's important. Now, what do we know about Nero? Our favorite emperor.
He let Rome burn because he wanted to build memorials to himself, and then he blames the Christians, and that's when the persecutions begin.
So we know that this would have been written between the Great Fire of Rome in 64 AD. Some guess, the Rome burned for maybe 10 days. First 7, then they couldn't put it out, kept going. Some say it has been up to 70% of the town burned. That's massive.
Yeah.
I'm thinking about the Great Chicago Fire, and when you live in Chicago for a while, everything refers back to the fire. So why is it that Chicago streets are more straight and you can get to where you want to go versus New York?
Yeah.
Well, because the fire, they could start over and build a more organized system. Or Lakeshore Drive, which is so gorgeous, up and down the lake. Well, that was built from the debris of the Great Fire, right? They just took all the trash from the fire, threw it in the lake and built a road over, right? So there's only one thing that I can remember downtown. There was a tower that survived. I think it's a water tower.
Water tower, yeah.
That survived a great fire.
Mhm.
So if, when was it? 1870? It was a few years before the World's Fair, I know, because New Yorkers didn't think that the people of Chicago could recover from the fire to pull off the World's Fair. And that is the origin of Windy City. It wasn't about the wind, it was that they were blowing a lot of hot air that they couldn't
Oh,
recover.
really?
But it stuck because of the wind. But the Windy City is not about the wind coming from the lake. It's
Bragging.
about bragging that they could still, after the Great Fire, put on the World's Fair. Think about this, 70% of the town's burned. Now, here's the curveball. Nero was hated by the elites of Rome, by the senators and by the wealthy, but he was loved by the people. So he was a populist. Brutal guy. He was 17 when he became emperor, and his girlfriend advice to him was to kill your mother. Now, I know some people have felt that way before their families, but that was quite the advice. And when you give it to an emperor, he can actually do something about that. So he did. He killed his mother based on the counsel from his girlfriend. I think it was, I wish I could remember her name. He was brutal, but he put on a lot of games, and he was really committed to civic building projects, which is why people liked him. And some think he wasn't just building, stuff for his benefit, but for the people. He had a project, he wanted to do this, so he organized the burning of a part of the town. It got out of hand. Fires do that sometimes. And now he needed a scapegoat because people were blaming him. And he found one. So in this time, great persecutions of Rome. And the two most famous, of course, are Paul, who is beheaded at this time. And we know that from his books. He knew things were not going well for him.
Yeah.
He pretty well writes at the end, this is not going to go well. I'm giving my farewell addresses here. We've read those. Peter is crucified, but he refuses to be crucified like Jesus. So he decides and requests, and they meet his request to be crucified upside down. I'm not sure how that makes sense. Crucifixion, is not that you bleed to death, it's that you suffocate, right? You can't, your arms get so tired, you can't pull yourself up to breathe. That was the whole idea. So it's a long torture. As you keep pulling, That's why, as we know, the nails are not in the hands, they're in the wrists, so that it would be enough structural power to pull up. But you can imagine for a couple hours, pulling up, that you can't do it anymore. And you become so weak, then you can't breathe. So I don't know how this makes sense, crucifying upside down. But I'm sure it was just as torturous. I can't imagine. Nothing but brutal.
Well, don't you think that was symbolic that he wanted people to know that Christ has turned everything upside down?
It was definitely eating a witness.
Yeah.
I'm not worthy even to die like Christ. However, you'll see in First Peter, he does say what an honor it is to suffer on behalf of Christ. So he's going to make that argument. Okay, you're suffering, you're being persecuted. Let me frame that differently for you to encourage you to receive this all as a blessing, which is kind of tough. We've all done that with our kids, right? Kids are suffering for this or that reason. And you say, well, can we reframe that for you? This is going to build character. Sometimes that character thing works. And sometimes you can just feel the heat coming back at you. Character, forget character. All right. Anything else to begin with this book? Tone, image, Old Testament images, incorporating for the Gentiles, encouragement with persecution. Do you notice that this is a constant theme in these New Testament books?
Yeah.
Constant encouragement
Encouraging.
for Christians who are being persecuted for their faith. All right. Want to roll the tape? You want to watch the imagery, see if you identify with what Peter is doing here. By the way, what was his name again? Does anyone know his?
Cephas.
So we'll see. He had different names, obviously, in different languages. You just want to notice how it comes around that we call him Peter.
The first letter of Peter. His name was Shimon, or Simon, when he first became a follower of Jesus, and he was part of the inner circle of the 12 disciples. When he made his confession that Jesus was the Messiah, Jesus changed his name to Kephas, which is Aramaic for rock, which was later translated into Greek as Petros or Peter. Jesus promised that he would become a leader among the apostles to guide the Messianic community in Jerusalem through its earliest years, and that's what happened. Remember the early chapters of the book of Acts. Eventually, Peter was called to carry the good news of Jesus beyond the borders of Israel, however, and this letter was written decades into that mission in the wider Roman world. We discover at the conclusion of this letter that Peter is in Rome, which he calls Babylon, and we learned that while Peter commissioned the letter, it was actually composed by a man named Silvanus, who was a co-worker of Peter. This was a circular letter sent to multiple church communities in the Roman province of Asia Minor, which is in modern-day Turkey. And Peter learned that these mostly non-Jewish Christians were persecuted. They were facing hostility and harassment from their Greek and Roman neighbors. And so Peter wrote to encourage them in the midst of their suffering. And this helps explain the letter's design and its main themes. It opens with a greeting, and then it moves into a poetic song of praise to God, which introduces the key themes that are explored in the main body of the letter, where he first affirms the new family identity of these persecuted Christians, which will help them see their suffering as a way to bear witness to Jesus. And this has a way of focusing their future hopes on the return of Jesus. Let's dive in. You'll just see how all the pieces work together. So Peter opens by greeting these churches as the chosen people of God who are exiled around the world. Now, Peter makes clear throughout the letter that these Christians he's writing to are Gentiles, but here he describes them with phrases from the Old Testament that describe how God chose the people of Israel, the family of Abraham, who was himself an exile and wanderer. This is a key strategy that Peter repeats through the whole letter. He wants these suffering non-Jewish Christians to see that through Jesus, they now belong to the family of Abraham. And so they're wandering exiles just like him, misunderstood, they're mistreated, and they're looking for their true home in the promised land. Peter continues this idea in the opening song. He praises God for causing people to be born again into a living hope through Jesus' resurrection and the power of the Spirit. God's inviting all people into a new family centered around Jesus, a family that has a new identity as God's beloved children and who have a new hope of a world reborn by God's love when Jesus returns as King. And for people who have this hope, suffering and persecution is actually a strange gift because it burns away false hopes and distractions like a purifying fire, and it reminds us of our true home and hope. And so paradoxically, life's hardships actually deepen our faith. They make it more genuine. From here, Peter's going to move on into the body of the letter, but he's going to explore all of these ideas in greater depth. So he first develops the theme about the new family identity of God's people. He takes even more memorable Old Testament images about the family of Israel, and then he applies them to these Gentile Christians. So like the Israelites who left Egypt, they too are to gird up their loins and leave behind their former way of life on the way to a new future. So they are the holy people of God now who are journeying through the wilderness. They are the people of the new Exodus who have been redeemed by the blood of Jesus, who's the ultimate Passover lamb. They are the people of the new covenant who have God's word buried deep inside them, restoring their hearts and renewing their minds. They are the new temple built on the foundation of Jesus himself, and they're the new kingdom of priests who are serving God as his representatives to the nations. Now, by applying all of these amazing images to these persecuted Gentile Christians, Peter is placing their suffering within a brand new story. And this leads into the next section. Their persecution can actually help bring clarity sincerity to their mission in the world, to bear witness to God's mercy among the nations. So Peter first encourages them to submit to Roman rule, even if it's oppressive. Yes, he acknowledges their persecution, their suffering is unjust. But violent resistance solves nothing, not to mention that it betrays the teachings of Jesus, who loved his enemies instead of killing them. Peter then specifically highlights the very difficult situation that Christian slaves and wives faced when they lived in Roman households where the patriarch did not follow Jesus. The problem was that it was expected that everyone in the household would submit to and worship the patriarch's gods. And so Peter's aware that giving allegiance to Jesus will generate suspicion. So Peter says it's true. All Christians, including Roman wives and slaves, have been fully liberated by Jesus. But they are to demonstrate that freedom not through rebellion, but by resisting evil the same way Jesus did, through showing love and generosity to your enemies. And in homes where the husband is also a Christian, it's a different story. They are to treat their wives totally different from their Roman neighbors, regarding them as equals before God who are worthy of honor and respect. And Peter's hopeful that this imitation of Jesus' love and upside-down kingdom will give power to their words as they bear witness to God's mercy and show people the beautiful truth about the way of Jesus. But Peter's also a realist. He knows that Christians will continue to be persecuted, and so he reminds them of their future vindication. He recalls how Jesus himself was unfairly persecuted and murdered by corrupt human powers, but in reality, he was dying for the sins of his enemies. And afterward, he was vindicated and given resurrection life by the Spirit. And now Jesus is exalted as king over all human and spiritual powers. Then Peter shows how baptism points to the vindication of Jesus' followers. So like Noah, they've been saved through the waters, not as a magic ritual, but as a sacred symbol that shows their change of heart, their desire to be joined to Jesus in his death and his resurrection. And so now, even if they are murdered for following Jesus, their hope is in future vindication and exaltation alongside their king. Which leads Peter into the final movement. He recalls Jesus' words that his disciples should consider it an honor and joy to be persecuted just like he was. Peter then calls on church leaders to care for these suffering Christians and to show the same kind of servant leadership that Jesus did to his followers. And finally, Peter reminds these Christians about the real enemy that they are facing. This hostility isn't simply cultural or even political. There are dark forces of spiritual evil at work, inspiring hatred and violence. And they are to resist this evil by staying faithful to Jesus and his teachings, and by anticipating his return and ultimate victory over such evil. Peter concludes with a prayer for divine strength, and he sends a greeting from the church in Rome, which he calls Babylon. Now this is cool. Peter's adopting here the tradition of the Old Testament prophets, for whom the name Babylon became an archetype for any and every corrupt nation. And so Rome has become the new Babylon, and its empire is where God's people are now exiled from their true home in the renewed creation. Peter's first letter is a powerful reminder of Christian hope in the midst of suffering. God's people have been a misunderstood minority from the very beginning, and they should expect to face hostility because they've chosen to live under the rule of a different king, Jesus. However, persecution can become a strange gift to the church because it offers a chance to show others the surprising generosity and love of Jesus, which is fueled by the hope of his return. And that's what 1 Peter is all about.
All right. What sticks out to you, what you saw? Did anything stick out?
The emphasis on persecution and that you should be glad for this, and I find that kind of tough. You know, because let's face it, who likes persecution?
And how did Peter try to answer that?
He's very realistic with them that it's gonna happen.
Right,
Okay, first of all, it's gonna happen.
you know,
Do you resist?
no, you don't, because Jesus said to follow the leaders.
Sermon on the Mount. Do not resist evil. I mean, it's such a shocking commandment from Jesus. Don't resist evil. Right, and we got a little bit of that last week. You can be angry, but just for a couple hours, that's all you got.
Be angry, but don't sin.
But that's interesting, Jesus says, don't be angry. Paul says, you can be angry, but just for a couple hours, until the sun sets. Because don't sin. And I think caution there is if you hold on to your anger too long, and that's a relative term for everybody, right? But if you hold on to it, you kind of know when you've crossed the line, and now the anger has opened you up to sin. Right? So here it is, persecute. It's not okay. Organize yourselves, buy weapons, fight back. It's don't resist evil. But there's other ways. Fortify yourself, be faithful. It's almost like an unfair fight sometimes. That's I'm kind of building. Someone's picking on me and someone hits me on one cheek. And what did Jesus say again?
Yeah.
Are you sure you heard that right? No. So it's a different way of responding to evil. And of course, who modeled that the best? We have Jesus. And so he points to that. Even Jesus was tortured and persecuted, but it's how God saved the world. So, Peter's showing his theology here of how to resist evil.
Yeah, you do resist, but you don't resist violently, you don't resist with, your resistance, it shows that you still are centered on God.
So it's a different kind of resisting.
But what would have happened if we wouldn't have had wars with the evil leaders in other areas of the world? If we wouldn't have fought World War II, what would have happened to all of us if we didn't take arms, set up arms to fight evil with what those people were trying to inflict on the people that followed the principles of God and Jesus? What would have happened to our country if we hadn't fought those wars?
So this is the eternal dialogue around the Sermon on the Mount. I'm presently reading Leo Tolstoy's book on my religion, where he reads the Sermon on the Mount, and he goes through a conversion in his life after writing Anna Karenina, War and Peace, all these great Russian novels, and then he converts to Jesus through his reading of the Sermon on the Mount. And he reads this, resist not. And then, of course, all his Orthodox priest friends say, that's not what it says. Obviously, you've got to have soldiers who can fight evil. When we're attacked, we have to be able to defend ourselves. Now, the way Tolstoy reads Jesus, and it's kind of pretty straightforward, he said that's why it says do not take oaths. Just let your yes be yes and your no be no, because he felt the way you always violently defend yourself is by joining the army, which is by taking an oath. So he links the taking of the oath to state level activity. And so soldiers, there's even a name for that. When you become a soldier, induction, you've taken the oath. There's a phrase for that we even use today. So he feels, and early Christians, many did not feel you could be a soldier and a Christian based on the Sermon on the Mount. So some, knowing that, would not be baptized until they finished their service in the military, because they felt that would have been some sort of backsliding or would have been a disavowal they were committing to. So this has been the eternal question. Now, Luther answered that you're not to resist, except if that's your calling. So if you've been called to be a soldier, then it's allowed. but not if you're not a soldier. If you've been called to be the hangman,
hanging people.
then you hang people because someone else has called you to do that. It's not something you chose to do. You're serving the community in that capacity. So that was Luther's way he tried to. Some will talk about just war theory, right? We'd even say, I'll fight for a just cause. But of course, you always fight for a just cause. Every cause I fight for is a just cause, right? Because I think
You
it's,
say,
that's why I'm fighting it, because I think it's just. So that's
He thinks the same thing.
right,
now that's Tolstoy's point. He said that's what Jesus is trying to say, is you can never fight a righteous battle because everyone's fighting a righteous battle. Everyone thinks their
Right.
God's on their side.
Right.
So stop it. No more oaths. Don't resist evil with violence.
what about the Pledge of Allegiance, is that an oath? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States.
So many early, some have said yes,
It's an
take no oaths. Luther always said, you could take an oath to the state. But I don't know how I'd have to read more about how he squared that with the Sermon on the Mount. The idea, and you see it here in Peter, is you can commit to serving the state, you just don't take an oath. My yes is a yes, I will do it. Put your hand on the Bible and say it before court. No, my yes is my yes, my no is my no. I don't have to I'm free in Christ to serve the neighbor, and I will do this. Take my word for granted, not to say an oath.
That's the way the Pennsylvania Dutch believe. And that they will not take oaths in court. Their yes is yes, their no, no, period.
I think that actually functions now in courts, because of course not everybody's a Christian, so some courts will bring out
Grand.
a Quran or something like that, Torah, but you're kidding. It's a Jewish person, you're not gonna bring out the Bible, right? That means nothing. So, again, you could still not make an oath, but still give your promise. And that's how many Christians say, that's how I will be obedient
Right,
to the sermon. The state still gets what the state wants,
right.
and you feel like you haven't crossed that line. But it's the eternal discussion of what does that mean? And police would say, well, what, how about me? You don't even have to go up it to soldiers, but how about police and their use of defense? So Lutherans have said, when you've been called by the state to say to defend, it has to still be just and right and all that other good stuff. But it's you can do that. Tolstoy's going, can't do that. If you take what Jesus said, because his point is, he thinks it's Jesus' point, resisting evil creates more evil. Now, most people, even at war, would say that's what happens. I mean, war is never an absolute good thing. Good might come out of it, but it's just so messy and just so awful. And that is how some would read why Jesus gave the Sermon on the Mount. It's once you start resisting, it's like it's the old tar baby thing, you get stuck and you can't pull yourself out of evil at that point. It's also interesting that he to not resist evil, don't take your family members to court. Don't take anyone to court, because once you start, suing someone, then they're going to sue you back, and then you don't have any idea what's going to come out of this whole thing. And then not only are you not supposed to sue, you can't get angry at your neighbors. Oh, and by the way, if you call someone a name which distances you from them, Texas says you fool. Even there, you're going to place yourself in difficult situations. The whole idea is the Christian tries to stay above the fray of evil and anger. So Sermon on the Mount is really quite amazing that way. And I mean, that's Tolstoy. I'm thinking of Tolstoy to us when I'm reading right now. I mean, he just says, this is what Jesus was commanding. And you have to be consistent. Luther and Tries to answer your question a different way. Other things that stick out.
Thank you.
By the way, that's what I didn't want to forget this. First, Peter says, okay, so what do you do if you're in a household where there are no Christians, but they force you to live according to the Roman rule, which was you followed the God of the patriarch. Whoever the God was that dad worships, the servants will worship that, the family will worship that. The idea was the family's united, put a positive spin on it, right? The family doesn't have religious issues dividing them. The family is brought together in the house under one religious belief. Now we can all see the positive side of that. Now, what does Paul say? How do you deal with that? Peter.
Yeah, he says to the slave, submit to your master.
To go along with it. You're free to do that.
But in your heart and mind, no different.
Correct. Now, again, this was a very controversial practice. We read that in Corinthians. Remember that when business people would go to sell in the marketplace, and the first order of business for your guild was to offer sacrifices to whatever God was overlooking your retail business. So, for example, with meat, can you eat meat that's been sacrificed to another god? And some said, of course you can. You don't believe in that God. It meant nothing to you, so just eat the meat. What's the problem? And others said, oh no, that's a slippery slope. Where's your witness that you don't believe in that whole ritual or the God that's behind it? And Christians were just completely divided. And you see that here where he's saying, okay, you're free, but go along with the master. And by the way, don't fight slavery. You're free. But if you fight it, it's just gonna boomerang back as far as evil and violence. We've seen this a couple times. Saw that with Paul. Remember when he wrote to the slaves, okay, you're free in Christ. Remember that Philemon and Onesimus. Don't rock the boat. You're free. You're no longer a slave, but now serve. Yeah, but now it's not your master. You serve your brother.
Change as a believer.
As a believer now,
Right.
you're free to do that. So no one should treat you like a slave. And oh, by the way, Philemon, you don't treat him like a slave. Treat him like a brother who will service you. It's trying to reframe the whole relationship.
But is Onesimus free to not serve?
So that's a great question. So Paul
But he's
says,
told to submit. He's told to submit, so.
in obedience to Christ, you will serve. So, I think the answer to that is yes. Only because now he's encouraging, he didn't have to go back. Onesimus did not have to go back to Philemon. So part of what Paul is saying is, look, you've converted in loyalty to me and Jesus. Now I want you to go back and serve now. Your master, not as a master, but as a brother.
You obeyed.
But I want you to go back and do that. And Philemon, I want you to receive him, okay? And if he's got, and I'm gonna help negotiate all this, right? If he stole something, which it seems like he did, I'll pay it back. You put it on my account.
Yeah.
I'm gonna do everything to get you to go back, to use your freedom to do the right thing. But I guess you could say Onesimus could have just taken off. I mean, he tried to get lost in the world and not have to go back.
But he obeyed.
But is Paul putting pressure on him to do
Yes.
the right thing? Yes, Paul's putting pressure on him, but I think you only can put pressure on someone if they're free. I'm trying to think that through. If they're free to make another choice, and you say, look, yeah, do the thing that Christ is calling you to do.
That whatever their work, whatever they're doing, whatever the job is that they're doing,
they're doing with excellence, to the glory, and the name of God. I mean, whatever they're going to do, they're serving God instead of just serving man alone. So they do the best that they possibly can with whatever they're supposed to be doing. They do an excellent job because they're serving God now, not just man, because whatever they're doing is in the name of God and giving him all the glory, that we can do the best we can with whatever job we're given. So I would think that they had, the Holy Spirit was working for them to do what they need to do, but do it with excellence because they're serving God, not just man.
Now, part of what they're doing, like that here, we're gonna look at two before we break up into groups. This living stone and the chosen people, because I think this really applies to Emmanuel in many ways, and so I just love this section. Therefore, rid yourselves of all malice and deceit, hypocrisy. I'm starting at 1:2:1. Envy and slander of every, like newborn babies, crave pure spiritual milk, so that by it you may grow up in your salvation, now that you have tasted that the Lord is good. You know, that whole taste and see that the Lord is good that we use. As you come to him, the living stone, rejected by men, but chosen by God and precious to him, coming to Jesus. You also, of course, when you hear this, rejected, when you come to the living stone, this is Peter writing this, right? Who's got an affinity for stone language, you know, being the rock. So I just always thought that was kind of interesting. So Peter's talking about Jesus as the living rock, the stone. You also, like living stones, are being built into a spiritual house to be a holy priesthood, offering spiritual sacrifices acceptable to God through Jesus Christ. For in scripture it says, see, I lay a stone in Zion, the chosen and precious cornerstone, and the one who trusts in him will never be put to shame. Again, I'm thinking, I can't prove this, but I just think Peter has always been fascinated ever since Jesus called him the rock with the stone language. Yeah. And also given this is probably Jesus's own job as a stonemason. You know? So now to you who believe, this stone is precious, but to those who do not believe, the stone the builders rejected become the capstone, and a stone that causes men to stumble, and a rock that makes them fall. Notice he's picking up all these stone tags. Again, I have no proof of that. I just think it's the way it is. They stumble because they disobey the message, which is also what they were destined for. But you are a chosen people, a royal priesthood, a holy nation. This is all Old Testament. This was the original call to Israel, that you are a holy nation, a royal priesthood. That is the vision that goes back to Garden of Eden. That the Garden of Eden, this special relationship that humanity would have with God, that's called priesthood. You'd be a priest. People belong to God that you may declare the praise of him who called you out of darkness into his wonderful light. Once you were not a people, but now you are a people of God. Once you had not received mercy, but now you have received mercy. I think this is an amazing text. So the reason I want to compare us to these communities in Turkey, because all of a sudden you've got slaves, you've got people from all over the empire. They're exiled, they're being moved around for all sorts of good or bad reasons. Maybe it was just pure trade and they're trying to find a place which has jobs. Sometimes it's persecution. Sometimes there's a fire and they're leaving. So all sorts, but now they've ended up in this community, and Peter's saying, oh no, this is God, you're a chosen people. You're a royal priesthood. And I'm sure they looked around and said, good gracious. In any other situation, we would never be in the same room together. I mean, and that's what Peter's seeing. He's seeing all these disparate people who don't belong together, so to speak, in the Roman society. And now who he's saying, Christ has brought you, you're the chosen, you're a royal priesthood, a nation.
Create family.
So the reason I say that is because we sort of live that out here in Emmanuel. When you look at who comes to church here on any Sunday, in our various communities, including out the park.
Mhm.
You know, what are we doing together? Right? Normally, we wouldn't all be together.
Mhm.
I mean, we have such disparities. We have Viking fans and Packer fans and Bear fans.
No fighting, please.
More seriously, we have people from Colombia
Mhm.
and from Venezuela and from Puerto Rico
Same.
and from
Yeah.
Haiti and from the East Coast,
Germany.
from Germany, from Norway, from all around the United States. We have people from all economic ways. Things about it. From, we have people with green cards, we have people struggling to find work, who are on the edge every day worrying that they might be picked up by Homeland Security. We have others who have had very successful careers, they're quite established. And everything in between, I mean, literally everything in between. What are we doing together? And here, I mean, Peter says, God's building a new house. You're a royal priesthood. And I'm sure, like sometimes we look around and go, wow, it's pretty amazing who's come together here. I'm sure they're doing that the same thing. They look around and go, whoa, we're a weird group.
Living stone.
Yeah, but you are, I mean, that's his whole, I think because they felt, what are we doing together?
Mhm.
A bunch of converts from all over the empire who now are meeting in somebody's home for church. And now they're supposed to be committed to one another. They're supposed to act like family. This is against Roman society. The things that usually bound you was family, and guild. So, you know, all the people or tent makers and Paul's, all the tent makers would find their guild that would bind them. It's the guild, or they're a professional, if they were farmers or whatever that might be. That's what bound them. And here Peter's saying it's something else. I just think this is a very powerful message.
It reminds
You were
me of
once
the
not a
old
people.
adage, people in glass houses shouldn't throw stones. That's what I kept thinking.
So I urge you as aliens and strangers in the world. Right? So now you're a house where you belong together because of Christ, and these other connections out there are what are strange and alien to you. That's interesting. Dear friends, I urge you as aliens and strangers in the world to abstain from sinful desires which war against your soul. Live such good lives among the pagans that, though they accuse you of doing wrong, they may see your good deeds and glorify God on the day he visits. Remember what's going on here. They're being blamed for the fire. So people, these pagans, are looking down on the Christians because they're saying, you're the ones. That's what Nero said. You know, we believe Nero, you know, no fake news here. Nero said it was the Christians. And so you can imagine how that spread through the empire, right? Where everybody's blaming this little group of Christians for one of the great tragedies that we could talk about. How many tragedies in the world we forget about? You know, here, this great fire of Rome, wow, and people were dislocated and killed. And it was really quite something. And now this little group in Turkey is blamed for it. Asian mind, sort of something. All right, anything else that you want to pick up on? Remember the wives and husbands section? That's quite interesting. Wives in the same way be submissive to your husband. You'll notice that.
He should respect his wife.
Although I always think this is, they were submissive to their own husbands, like Sarah, who obeyed Abraham and called him her master. Where did they find that in the Bible? I mean, I don't remember that.
Called him his Lord. Oh,
I don't. But so I remember her laughing.
yeah.
I remember her taking things out after she suggested Abraham procreate with the slave girl. I remember that.
Right, that's her idea.
I remember her casting out Ishmael and Hagar, but I don't remember this text, so I'll have to go back and review that. But it's interesting, that's how he uses it. Sarah becomes like the perfect wife here. Anything else? Let's get in our groups then.
Oh, what about chapter 5? I like that. Be self-controlled and alert your enemy, that the devil prowls around like a roaring.
Oh,
lion.
exactly.
That's
This is one that was in some churches quoted all the time, I think in Sunday school. Be self-controlled and alert, your enemy, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion, looking for someone to devour. Resist him, standing firm in the faith, because you know that your brothers throughout the world are undergoing the same kind of suffering.
But then the next part is wonderful. And the God of all grace, who called you into his eternal glory in Christ, after you have suffered a little while, will himself restore you, make you strong, firm and steadfast. To him be the power forever and ever. Amen.
A lot like that verse 7, cast all your anxiety on him because he cares for you. These are ones that are, these last admonitions in these shorter books are just amazing. It's just like one after the other. You just want to make one bumper sticker after the other with each of these. God opposes the proud, but gives grace to the humble. That goes against every instinct we have. Right?
Told to be proud. all the
Yeah,
time.
yeah. All right, let's get in our groups and see what you pick up. All these texts that you, the takeaways that you'll pull from First Peter.